The tent was zipped from the inside. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. Not the silence, not the cold, not the way the morning light fell across the canyon floor like something spilled. It was the zipper. The small nylon pull tab resting on the interior side of the flap, right where someone's fingers would have pinched it shut before settling in for the night. He called her name. Once. Twice. The canyon gave his voice back to him a half-second late, like it needed to think about it first. He reached through the gap in the vestibule and pulled the zipper down from the outside, working the teeth apart with clumsy, cold fingers. The flap fell open. The sleeping bag was there, unrolled, still holding the shape of a body. He pressed his palm against the fabric and felt warmth, faint, fading, but real. Someone had been lying here, recently. The boots were placed neatly by the tent wall, laces still tied, the way she always left them. Her jacket was folded over her pack. Her headlamp was clipped to the interior loop near the ceiling, still switched on. The beam a pale, dying amber. The battery almost spent. Everything was in order. Everything except Danny. He stood there for a long time holding the tent flap open, staring at the empty sleeping bag. The warmth under his palm disappeared while he stood there. And something about that feeling, the last trace of her body heat leave the fabric, was worse than anything he could have imagined. 6 days earlier, none of this existed. Not the canyon, not the silence, not the thing that would follow them out of it. 6 days earlier, Marcus Sheely was standing in his apartment parking lot in Flagstaff, loading camping gear into the bed of his truck and trying to remember the last time he'd done something that wasn't work, sleep, or sitting alone in his kitchen at 2 a.m, wondering where the last year had gone. The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago. Quiet, almost polite. They'd divided things with the efficiency of coworkers splitting a lunch tab. She got the dog, he got the apartment. Neither of them cried. That bothered him more than anything, the absence of grief. As if the marriage had already been dead so long that by the time the paperwork caught up, there was nothing left to mourn. This trip was his idea. He'd said the word reset when he pitched it to Owen on the phone, and then immediately hated himself for using it. But Owen, who had known Marcus since they were 16 and understood him better than most people ever would, didn't push. He just said, "Yeah, man, tell me when." Now Owen was here, standing in the parking lot with his girlfriend Ray, both of them lifting a cooler into the second truck while arguing gently about whether they packed enough water. Owen Teague had the particular gift of making every situation feel slightly less serious than it actually was. He was 32, taught American history at a high school in Tempe, and had a face that looked like it was always about to tell you a joke you didn't ask for. He was the kind of person who could walk into a hospital waiting room and somehow make everyone feel like things might turn out all right. Marcus had needed that quality more in the last 4 months than he'd ever admit. Ray Kimura stood beside Owen, quieter, watching the gear get loaded with an expression that wasn't quite concern and wasn't quite curiosity. She was 28, a ceramics artist who worked out of a small studio in Owen's garage, and she had a quality that Marcus had never quite been able to name. She noticed things, not in the obvious way, not pointing and commenting, but in a slower, deeper way, like she was reading the room the way other people read weather. She'd look at someone and see something they hadn't said yet. It could be unsettling. Owen found it beautiful. Marcus found it both. The last truck door slammed and Marcus turned to see Danny and Connor walking across the lot. Danny carrying a duffel that was almost certainly too heavy and refusing to acknowledge it. Danielle Royce Danny, to everyone who knew her more than 5 minutes, was Marcus's younger sister by 2 years, and she was, in almost every measurable way, the tougher of the two. She'd been an ER nurse in Phoenix for 6 years. She'd held people's hands while they died. She'd told families the worst news of their lives and then gone back to work because there were more patients and the shift wasn't over. She didn't scare, she didn't rattle. And she had driven up from Phoenix specifically because Marcus had asked her to, and because she knew that when Marcus asked for anything, it meant he was closer to the edge than he'd ever say. Connor Brosk walked beside her, carrying nothing because Danny had already grabbed the bag before he could offer. He was 30, built like someone who swung a hammer for a living, because he did. Construction. He'd come into the group through Owen. They'd played in the same recreational softball league 3 summers ago. And he'd stuck around because he was easy to be around in the way that loud, confident people sometimes are. He was the skeptic of the group, not in a hostile way. He just lived in a world made of concrete and rebar, and things you could measure with a tape, and he trusted that world completely. Anything outside of it was a campfire story, and campfire stories were entertainment, not evidence. Marcus spread a topographic map across the tailgate of his truck. He'd found the spot 3 weeks ago while scrolling through USGS surveys, a canyon system in northeastern Arizona, near the edge of the Navajo Nation. No trail name, no all trails listing, no hashtag. Just a seasonal creek threading through sandstone walls, surrounded by old-growth juniper and pinon pine, and a flat clearing that the contour line suggested might be the only decent campsite for miles. Owen leaned over the map, interested. Connor pointed at the nearest marked road and traced the distance with his finger. "That's a hell of a drive to sleep on the ground." "That's the point," Marcus said. Ray reached past Owen and traced the canyon with her fingertip, following the creek line from its origin to where it disappeared into a narrowing gorge. "Has anyone actually camped here before?" Marcus hesitated a beat too long before answering. "I don't know. I couldn't find anything about it." Connor grinned. "Good. I'm tired of campsites that feel like hotel lobbies." Ray pulled her hand back from the map and said nothing, but she looked at the canyon lines for a moment longer than anyone else, and something in her expression shifted a flicker, gone before it fully formed, like a cloud passing across the sun too fast to cast a real shadow. They left Flagstaff at noon under a sky so blue it looked painted. The interstate gave way to a state highway, and the state highway gave way to a 2-lane road that wound through a stretch of high desert, so empty it felt like driving through a photograph. The towns thinned out, then disappeared. Gas stations became trading posts, became nothing. The land opened up on both sides, red earth, low scrub, the occasional windmill standing alone against the horizon like a forgotten sentinel. Marcus drove the lead truck with Danny in the passenger seat. Owen followed in his truck with Ray and Connor. They kept a loose distance, and for the first hour, the drive felt exactly like what Marcus had wanted it to feel like: simple, forward, away. Then they turned off the 2-lane onto a BLM dirt road, and the character of everything changed. The road narrowed, washboard ruts rattled the suspension. Dust rose behind them in a column that hung in the still air like smoke. Danny checked her phone and watched the signal bars drop from 2 to 1 to nothing. She held the phone up for Marcus to see. "Dead," she said. "Good," Marcus said, though his voice didn't carry the same conviction it had in the parking lot. Behind them, Connor would later say he made a joke about being off the grid. Owen laughed. Ray, sitting in the back seat with her sketchbook open on her lap, didn't. 20 minutes down the dirt road, they passed a trading post. It sat back from the road on a patch of hard-packed earth, a low cinder-block building with a corrugated metal roof and a single gas pump that looked like it hadn't worked in years. A hand-painted sign out front read something Marcus couldn't make out through the dust. An older woman sat in a folding chair by the entrance. Navajo, maybe 70, maybe older. She wore a dark blue blouse and a turquoise squash blossom necklace that caught the sunlight. She was watching the road, not reading, not doing anything, just sitting, facing the road, as if she'd been waiting. Owen waved as they passed. She did not wave back. She didn't move at all. She watched the trucks go by with an expression that Marcus, glancing in the rearview mirror, couldn't quite read. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't friendly. It was something closer to recognition, like she'd seen trucks like theirs drive down this road before, and already knew how the story ended. The landscape shifted as they climbed an elevation. The red dirt deepened to a rusty brown, almost maroon. The scrub thickened into juniper and pinon pine, twisted and ancient. Their bark cracked into patterns that looked almost deliberate. The sky, which had been open and endless on the highway, began to feel lower here, closer, as if the land were slowly rising to meet it. They reached the end of the road at a dry wash, a wide, flat expanse of cracked mud and smooth stones where water ran during monsoon season, but hadn't for months. Marcus parked and stepped out. The air was different here, thinner, cooler. It carried a faint mineral smell, like wet rock, even though everything was dry. Owen pulled in beside him and cut the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and total. No highway drone, no airplane, no distant machinery. Just the tick of cooling engines and the sound of 5 people standing in a place that hadn't heard a human voice in a long time. Connor stretched and looked around. Beautiful. It was. Marcus couldn't argue that. The canyon mouth opened ahead of them, a narrow passage between 2 sandstone walls that rose 40 feet high, their surfaces layered in bands of red and cream and gray like the pages of a very old book. They geared up, packs loaded, water distributed, boots tightened. The hike-in was 3 miles, and Marcus had warned them it would be rough, no-maintained trail, just the creek bed and whatever game paths the canyon offered. As they shouldered their packs, Ray crouched at the edge of the wash, looking at the ground. "Come look at this." They gathered around her. Pressed into the dried mud were animal tracks, canine, 5-toed, with clear claw marks. But they were large, too large. Each print was nearly 4 inches across, and the stride between them stretched longer than any coyote Marcus had ever tracked. Connor glanced down. Big coyote. Marcus pulled his camera from his chest harness and photographed the prints. He didn't say what he was thinking, that the stride length was wrong. Too long for a coyote, but too narrow for a wolf. Wolves hadn't been in this part of Arizona in decades. And even if they had, the gait was off. The prints didn't alternate cleanly the way a trotting canine's should. They staggered, as if the animal had been walking on 2 legs and then dropped to 4. He didn't say that. He took the photo and stood up and said, "Let's go." The hike-in was beautiful, in the way that remote places are beautiful, not polished, not welcoming, but honest. The canyon walls rose around them as they walked, narrowing the sky to a bright ribbon overhead. The creek bed was dry but showed signs of recent flow watermarks on the stone, smooth pebbles arranged in current patterns, a faint dampness in the deepest shade. Juniper roots gripped the canyon walls like fingers. The air cooled as they went deeper, and the light took on a golden, filtered quality, as if they were walking into an old photograph. But the sound changed. That was the thing Marcus noticed first. Their footsteps echoed, which was expected in a canyon, but the echo was wrong. It came back a beat too late, a half-second delay that made it sound like someone was walking just behind them, matching their pace. Marcus stopped once to listen. The echo stopped with him, but it stopped a fraction of a second after he did. He didn't mention it. He kept walking. After 2 hours, the canyon opened into a clearing. It was almost perfectly flat, a natural shelf of sandstone covered in a thin layer of sandy soil, shaded by a stand of old junipers on one side and backed by a curved wall of rock on the other three. The seasonal creek ran along the far edge, its bed dry but smooth. It was sheltered from wind. It was level. It was large enough for 3 tents with room to spare. It was, by every measure, the perfect campsite. Owen dropped his pack and turned a slow circle. "You found this on a map?" Marcus nodded. "It's like it was made for us," Owen said, and smiled. Later, Marcus would think about that sentence. It's like it was made for us. He'd think about it the way you think about a door that was open when it should have been locked, not what it means, but what it allowed. They set up camp with the efficiency of people who'd done it before. 3 tents, Marcus in his solo, Owen and Ray in the 2-person. Danny and Connor sharing the third, not by romance, but by math. Danny said she didn't care as long as Connor didn't snore. Connor said he'd never snored in his life. Owen said that was a lie. For a little while, it was good, really good. They gathered wood, built a fire ring from creek stones, got the flames going as the light began to fade. The canyon walls caught the firelight and turned the color of burnt copper. Danny opened a bottle of bourbon she'd packed in her duffel, and they passed it around, and the conversation drifted the way conversations do among people who know each other well enough to be comfortable with silence. Owen told a story about a student who'd written an entire essay about Abraham Lincoln, using only information from a movie that turned out to be about vampires. Connor laughed so hard he choked on bourbon. Ray leaned against Owen's shoulder and sketched the fire in her book with quick, confident lines. Marcus sat slightly outside the circle of light, watching his friends, and for the first time in months felt something that wasn't grief or numbness. Something close to okay. Then the dark came. It came faster than it should have. The canyon walls blocked the last of the western light 20 minutes before true sunset, and the transition was abrupt, like someone had drawn a curtain across the top of the canyon. One moment, the sky was pale gold. The next, the only light was the fire and a scattering of stars visible through the narrow gap overhead. And with the dark came the silence. Not quiet. Quiet is the absence of loud. This was different. This was silence heavy, physical, a presence rather than an absence. No crickets, no night birds, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, no wind through the junipers. The fire crackled and popped, and between each crack and pop, there was nothing. Absolute nothing. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the sound of your own blood moving through your veins. Connor poked the fire with his stick. The pop echoed off the canyon walls and died. Owen was the one who said it. He'd been sitting quietly for a few minutes, head slightly tilted, the way he did when he was listening for something he couldn't quite identify. "Is it always this quiet out here?" No one answered, because no one knew. None of them had been here before. None of them had anything to compare it to. Ray closed her sketchbook. She looked out past the fire into the dark where the canyon walls became shapes and the shapes became nothing. She looked for a long time. "It's not just quiet," she said, almost to herself. "It's like everything left." Connor tossed his stick into the fire. "It's the canyon walls. They block the sound. It's just acoustics." "Since when do acoustics make bugs disappear?" Danny said. She was sitting with her arms crossed, and Marcus recognized the posture. It was her clinical mode, the way she sat when a patient's vitals didn't match their symptoms. She wasn't scared, she was thinking. "Bugs go quiet when the temperature drops," Connor said. "The temperature hasn't dropped." Connor opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the fire instead. They stayed up another hour, but the conversation never recovered. The silence between words grew wider, and every pause felt occupied, as if the canyon itself was leaning in to listen. At some point, they stopped trying to fill it and just sat with it, each of them looking into the fire or into the dark, and each of them, though they wouldn't say it until much later, feeling the same thing, that they were being watched, not by something hiding in the shadows, not by an animal crouched beyond the firelight, by the place itself, by the canyon walls and the still air and the empty creek bed and the sky reduced to a narrow slit of stars above them. The whole landscape silent and alert, watching 5 people sit around a fire in a clearing that was shaped like a palm, waiting to close. One by one, they went to their tents. Good nights were exchanged, zippers closed. Marcus lay in his sleeping bag and stared at the nylon ceiling of his tent, and listened to the silence and tried to convince himself that silence was just silence. He was still trying when he fell asleep. Marcus woke and didn't know why. There was no sound, no shift in temperature, no dream residue clinging to the edges of his mind. He simply went from asleep to awake in the space between one breath and the next. And the transition was so clean, so complete, that it frightened him. He'd never woken like that before without cause, without confusion, without the slow swim toward consciousness that sleep usually required. It was as if something had reached inside him and flipped a switch. He lay still. The tent was dark. The fire outside had burned down to nothing. No glow against the nylon walls, no ember light bleeding through the fabric. Just darkness, so total that he couldn't see his own hand when he raised it in front of his face. He listened. Nothing. The same thick silence from earlier. The silence that felt like a physical substance filling the canyon. His sleeping bag rustled when he breathed, and the sound was enormous, offensive, like he was disturbing something that demanded stillness. Then footsteps. Outside, close. On the hard-packed dirt just beyond his tent wall, slow, deliberate. The careful, measured placement of weight that wasn't rushed and wasn't cautious. It was purposeful, something walking with intention. Marcus held his breath. The footsteps moved along the left side of his tent, past the vestibule, and continued around the back. He tracked them with his ears, his head turning on the pillow as the sound traveled. They circled his tent completely and arrived back where they'd started. Then they continued to the same path, the same pace, the same rhythm. A perimeter. Something was walking a slow, steady loop around the place where he slept. He exhaled. Someone was up. Owen, probably, or Connor. walking off restlessness or a full bladder. He waited for the footsteps to pass the front of the tent again, and when they did, he whispered through the nylon, "Owen?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Before, it had been passive, the absence of sound. Now it was active. Something was standing outside his tent, less than 3 feet from his face, and it was listening to him listen to it. Marcus didn't move, didn't breathe. 5 seconds, 10, 15. The footsteps resumed. Same path, same pace, same steady mechanical rhythm. As if the interruption hadn't happened. As if his voice hadn't registered at all. Or worse, as if it had registered and been dismissed. They circled again, and again, and again. Each revolution identical, the same distance between steps, the same pressure on the ground, the same slight scrape of sole against grit. No variation, no adjustment. A person walking would shift their weight, scuff a stone, vary their stride. This didn't. It was a pattern being executed, a loop being run. Marcus lay in the dark and counted the revolutions. He lost count after 9. At some point, he didn't know when the footsteps stopped. Not gradually. They didn't trail off into the distance. They simply ended mid-stride, the way a recording ends when someone presses a button. One moment the sound was there, the next, silence. He waited 20 minutes before he unzipped his tent. Moonlight filled the canyon. It poured over the rim of the eastern wall and turned the clearing silver blue, painting hard shadows beneath the junipers and catching the smooth stones of the dry creek bed. The air was still. Nothing moved. Marcus looked at Owen and Ray's tent, zipped. He moved to it carefully, placing his feet on bare rock to avoid crunching gravel, and pressed his ear close. Owen's breathing deep, slow, unmistakable. Ray's, lighter, beside him. Both asleep. Connor and Danny's tent, zipped. He listened. Connor's breathing, heavy and rhythmic. Danny's, barely audible. Both asleep. Everyone accounted for. He stood in the center of the clearing and turned slowly, scanning the canyon walls, the tree line, the creek bed, the darkness beyond the reach of the moonlight. Nothing, no movement, no shape, no eyes catching the light. Just the canyon, silent and enormous and empty. Except it didn't feel empty, it felt occupied. Not by something hiding, by something so still that it had become part of the landscape, the way a stone becomes part of a riverbed. Something that had been standing there long before the moonlight reached it, and would be standing there long after it passed. Marcus had the sudden, irrational certainty that if he could see the entire canyon at once, every shadow, every crevice, every dark space between the juniper trunks, he would find it, and it would already be looking at him. He went back to his tent. He zipped it shut. He did not sleep again. Morning came with a pale, colorless light that made everything look flat and slightly unreal. Marcus crawled out of his tent with grit in his eyes and a headache building behind his temples. The others were already up, Owen boiling water for coffee on the camp stove, Ray sitting cross-legged on a flat rock with her sketchbook, Connor splitting a granola bar with Danny. Marcus poured himself coffee and stood near the fire ring. He waited until the silence felt natural rather than pointed, and then he said casually, like it didn't matter, "Did any of you get up last night? I heard footsteps." Owen looked up. "No, I was out cold." Ray shook her head without looking up from her sketchbook. Danny glanced at him. "What kind of footsteps?" "Someone walking around my tent for a while." Connor bit into his granola bar. Ringtail cat, maybe a fox. They're curious about camps. He chewed. They'll circle tents if they smell food. I didn't have food in my tent. They don't know that. Marcus looked at Danny. She was watching him with her clinical expression, not alarmed, not dismissive, just reading him the way she read patients. She held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod that could have meant anything. I hear you. I'm paying attention. Ray said nothing, but when Marcus glanced at her, she was looking at him over the top of her sketchbook with an expression he couldn't identify, something too knowing for comfort, as if she'd been expecting him to say exactly what he'd said. They spent the day exploring the canyon. It was, despite everything, beautiful. The walls rose in layered strata, deep red at the base, fading to cream and pale orange near the rim. And the light played across them as the sun moved, turning the stone into something that seemed almost alive, shifting color like the skin of an animal. Marcus photographed everything. The juniper trunks, braided and split by centuries of freeze and thaw. The creek bed, dry but shaped by water into smooth, organic curves. The canyon walls, pocked with small caves and overhangs that might have sheltered people 1,000 years ago. Owen found the petroglyphs. They were on a high shelf of rock, about 15 feet up, accessible by a natural ramp of fallen sandstone. Owen climbed up first, and the sound he made, not a word, more of a breath, brought the others up after him. The images were carved into the dark desert varnish that coated the rock face, revealing the lighter stone beneath, spirals, geometric patterns, animal figures, bighorn sheep, snakes, a bird with spread wings. They were old, not decades old, centuries, maybe longer. Owen crouched in front of them, running his fingers just above the surface without touching. He was quiet for a long time. Some of these are ancestral Puebloan, he said. The spirals, the sheep, pretty standard. And the others? Marcus asked. Owen didn't answer immediately. He was looking at a cluster of images set apart from the rest, carved deeper, with rougher strokes. 3 vertical lines. A circle with marks radiating from it, not like a sun. More like a circle being broken apart from inside. And beside them, larger than the other figures, a shape that was almost human. Almost. The torso was right. The head was right. But the limbs were wrong. Too many joints, bending in directions that didn't correspond to any skeleton Marcus could imagine. The fingers, if they were fingers, extended downward past where the knees should have been. The figure was standing upright, but it looked like something that had learned the concept of standing from a description rather than from experience. What is that? Danny asked. Owen stood up slowly. I'm not sure. His voice had changed, flattened, the way voices do when someone is choosing words carefully. Some of these don't look like the standard iconography. They look more like... He paused. Warnings. Connor was already climbing back down. Cool rock art, Professor. Can we eat lunch? Owen looked at the many-jointed figure for another moment. Then he followed Connor down. They ate in a side ravine where a natural overhang provided shade. It was during the meal that Ray set down her sandwich and stood up without explanation. She walked around a bend in the ravine, out of sight. The group waited. After a minute, she called back. You should see this. They found her standing at the base of a shallow depression in the canyon floor, looking down at a coyote. It was dead. Recently dead, no bloating, no decomposition smell, the fur still smooth and clean. It lay on its side with its legs extended, as if it had been mid-stride and simply collapsed. Its mouth was open, frozen in a position that might have been a howl or a scream or something between the two, the lips pulled back from the teeth, the tongue dry and pale. Its eyes were gone. Not pecked out, not scavenged. There were no marks around the sockets, no torn flesh, no dried blood, no sign that anything had removed them. The sockets were simply empty, clean, smooth. As if the eyes had never been there, as if the animal had been born, had lived, and had died without ever having had them. The group stood around the coyote in silence. Connor crouched down and looked closely. "Owl," he said, "or a raven. They go for the eyes first." Danny knelt beside him. She pulled back the coyote's lip with the tip of a stick, checking the gums. Then she pressed her hand against the animal's side, feeling the rib cage, the abdomen. She lifted one of its legs and let it fall. It dropped loosely, naturally, the way a limb drops when the muscles have released but rigor hasn't set in. "This animal died recently," she said. "Maybe 12 hours, but there's no rigor, none at all." She looked up at them. "That doesn't happen. Rigor sets in within 2 to 4 hours. By 12 hours, it should be stiff." She pressed the rib cage again. "And there's no bloating, no gas buildup. The gut bacteria should have started working by now." "So what does that mean?" Owen asked. Danny stood up and brushed the dirt from her knees. She looked at the coyote for a long time. "It means the body isn't decomposing the way a body should. It's like it just stopped. Like the biological processes that happen after death didn't start." "That's not possible," Connor said. Danny looked at him. "No, it's not." They left the coyote in the ravine and walked back to camp. No one suggested going back for another look. No one suggested photographing it. No one, not even Connor, offered another explanation. The second evening was quieter than the first. They built the fire, they cooked dinner, they ate. But the laughter was gone, replaced by a careful, measured conversation that avoided certain topics: the footsteps, the petroglyphs, the coyote, with the precision of people walking around a hole in the floor. After dinner, they sat around the fire, and Ray said what everyone was thinking. "There's no sound." She said it simply, without drama. She was holding her coffee mug in both hands, staring at the fire. "There was no sound last night. There's no sound now. I've been in remote places. I've camped in the Sierras, in the Cascades, on the Olympic coast. There are always sounds, insects, wind, water, animals, always. Even in the most isolated places, the world makes noise." She paused. "Here, it's like the ecosystem packed up and left. Not quiet, empty. Like everything that lives here already knows something we don't." Connor exhaled through his nose, not quite a scoff, but close. "You're psyching yourselves out, all of you. One weird night of sleep and a dead coyote, and suddenly we're in a horror movie." "I didn't say anything about a horror movie," Ray said quietly. "You're implying it. I'm describing what I'm observing." Connor stood up. "Well, I'm observing that it's cold, and I'm tired, and I'm going to sleep like a baby, because that's what happens when you hike all day." He tossed the rest of his coffee into the dirt. "Good night." His tent zipper cut through the silence. Then silence returned. Owen put his arm around Ray. Danny stared at the fire. Marcus watched the darkness beyond the firelight and tried to remember the last time he'd been somewhere that felt like this. Not frightening, exactly, but attentive. A place that was paying attention. They went to bed one by one. Good nights were quieter than the night before. Danny lay in her sleeping bag and listened to Connor's breathing settle into the thick, even rhythm of deep sleep. She stared at the ceiling of the tent and watched the nylon shift faintly in a breeze so slight it barely existed. She was tired. Her legs ached from the hike. Her mind should have let go. It didn't. At some point, she checked the time later and found it was 12 minutes past midnight. She heard it. Danny. Her name, spoken from outside the tent, close. Maybe 10 feet away, toward the tree line. Whispered, but clearly, in Marcus's voice. She lifted her head off the pillow. Her heart rate didn't spike. It never did. Not after 6 years in an emergency room. Instead, it steadied, and her senses sharpened, and she became very still and very focused, the way she became when a patient's monitor started alarming. Danny, come out here. You need to see this. Marcus's voice, exactly Marcus's voice. The pitch, the cadence, the particular way he dropped the ends of his sentences when he was being serious. She knew her brother's voice the way she knew her own face, without thinking, without analysis, with the bone-deep certainty of shared blood. Her hand moved toward the zipper. Then she stopped. She played the sentence back in her mind. Danny, come out here. You need to see this. The words were right. The voice was right. But something underneath the words was wrong. Something she couldn't identify intellectually, but could feel in the same place she felt it when a patient told her they were fine, and their pupils said they were dying. The words had Marcus's sound, but not Marcus's self. They were a shell, a reproduction, a perfect imitation of the surface with nothing behind it. She pulled her hand back from the zipper and held it against her chest. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. Danny, come out here. You need to see this. The same sentence, exactly the same. The same inflection on come. The same pause between here and you. The same slight breath before this. Identical, not similar, identical. A person repeating themselves shifts their emphasis, shortens a syllable, adds impatience or concern. This was a copy, a playback. The same audio file run twice. Danny pressed her back against the ground and stared at the tent ceiling and did not move. Danny, come out here. You need to see this. A third time, same words, same voice, same everything. A loop. A thing outside her tent had her brother's voice in its mouth and was running it in a circle the way something had run footsteps in a circle around Marcus's tent the night before. Danny squeezed her eyes shut and clenched her fists against her sternum and waited. The silence came back. It held. It didn't break again. Beside her, Connor slept through all of it. In the morning, Danny waited until Owen and Ray were occupied with breakfast, and Connor was down at the creek washing his face. Then she took Marcus by the arm and walked him 30 yards from camp, into the shadow of a juniper where the morning light hadn't reached. Did you call my name last night? Marcus looked at her. No, I didn't leave my tent. You slept through the night? First time since we got here. Yeah, why? Danny told him. She told him exactly what she'd heard, exactly how she'd heard it, exactly what was wrong with it. She spoke the way she gave medical reports, clear, precise, emotionless. But Marcus knew her. He could see her hands. They were trembling. When she finished, Marcus's face had lost its color. Not the dramatic pallor of a fainting spell, a slower, deeper drain, like watching sand run out of something. The footsteps the first night, he said, around my tent. They repeated too, same pattern, same rhythm, over and over, like a recording. They stood there in the shade and looked at each other, and between them passed the particular understanding of siblings, the wordless acknowledgement that they were both thinking the same thing, and neither of them wanted to say it.
They went back to camp and Danny told the others. She told them at the fire ring while they ate breakfast, and she told them the same way she told Marcus, factual, sequential, without embellishment. Owen set his coffee down and didn't pick it up again. Ray sat motionless, her sketchbook closed on her lap, her face carrying an expression that Marcus finally recognized. Not surprise, confirmation. She looked like someone who had been waiting for a diagnosis she already suspected. Connor came back from the creek with a wet face and a skeptic's patience already wearing through. "You were dreaming," he said. Danny looked at him. She didn't argue, she didn't raise her voice. She said very evenly, "I have been woken up by cardiac alarms, code blues, and a man with a hunting knife in my ER at 3 in the morning. I know the difference between being asleep and being awake. I was awake. Something outside that tent used my brother's voice and it wanted me to come out." "Used his voice," Connor repeated. "Listen to what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." "You're saying something mimicked a human voice. Do you understand how that sounds?" "I understand how it sounds. I also understand what I heard." Owen stepped in, his hands raised slightly, palms out, the peacemaker's reflex. "Okay, let's just take a breath." "I don't need a breath," Danny said. "I need us to take this seriously." Marcus spoke. "I think we should leave a day early." Connor turned on him. "We hiked 3 miles in here with 60-pound packs, in heat, over terrain that nearly broke my ankle twice. And you want to turn around because your sister had a bad dream and you heard a fox walk around your tent? It wasn't a fox. You don't know that. I know what a fox sounds like." "Do you? Do you know what every single animal in this canyon sounds like?" "Because I don't. And I'm not about to pack up and hike out in the middle of what was supposed to be a vacation because we've all collectively decided to scare ourselves." The argument burned for another few minutes and then died the way campfires do, not with a resolution, but with a depletion of fuel. Connor went to his tent to reorganize his pack. Owen sat with his head in his hands. Ray opened her sketchbook and drew nothing. Marcus walked the perimeter of the camp. He told himself he was looking for tracks. He was. But it was Owen who found it. He'd gone to the tree line to relieve himself, 30 yards north of the tents where the junipers grew close together, and the ground was covered in a dry mat of fallen needles. He came back walking carefully, like someone trying not to run, and he found Marcus and pulled him aside and spoke quietly. "Come with me. Don't bring the others." They walked to the tree line. Owen pointed at the ground. Stones, small, smooth, creek bed stones, each one roughly the size of a fist. They were arranged in a line, not scattered, not random, but placed. Deliberately, precisely, one after another, about 8 inches apart. The line curved gently along the edge of the tree line, following the perimeter of the camp. Owen led Marcus along it. The line continued. It curved around the northern edge of the clearing, past the junipers, along the base of the canyon wall, and kept going. A boundary, a border, a circle of placed stones ringing the entire campsite. "These weren't here yesterday," Owen said.
His voice was very controlled, the way a teacher's voice gets controlled when a student asks a question that frightens him. I walked this perimeter yesterday. I would have seen them. Marcus knelt and touched one of the stones. He pulled his hand back. It was warm. Not sun warm, the stone was in full shade, hadn't seen direct light in hours. But it was warm the way skin is warm, the way living things are warm. He looked up at Owen.
Owen's face said everything his voice wouldn't. His eyes were wide, not with panic, but with the particular fear of a man who has spent his life studying history and recognizes something ancient, not from a textbook, but from instinct. From the part of the brain that predates language, the part that knows certain places are not meant for certain people. "We need to leave," Owen said. He wasn't asking. Marcus looked at the ring of stones, at the canyon walls rising above them, at the clearing that had seemed so perfect, so welcoming, so conveniently shaped for human habitation. A palm, he'd thought, shaped like a palm, waiting to close. Marcus and Owen didn't tell the others about the stones. They made a decision without discussing it, the way people sometimes do when the truth is too heavy to carry in a group. They looked at each other across the ring of warm creek-bed stones, and something passed between them that wasn't a word but functioned like one. "We leave at first light. No vote, no argument. We go." They walked back to camp. Owen went to Ray and sat beside her and put his hand on her knee and said nothing. Marcus poured himself coffee he didn't want and stood near the fire ring and watched Connor emerge from his tent with his pack reorganized and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he'd decided to be fine. The day passed with a fragile, artificial normalcy. They stayed close to camp. No one suggested exploring. Owen read a paperback he'd brought. Marcus noticed he'd been on the same page for an hour. Connor sharpened his pocket knife on a stone, the rhythmic scraping filling the silence like a metronome. Ray sketched. In the late afternoon, Marcus walked past Ray and glanced down at her sketchbook. He stopped. She'd been drawing the canyon, the walls, the juniper line, the shelf of rock where the petroglyphs were. But layered over the canyon drawings, repeated on page after page, was the same image. A silhouette, human-shaped, standing at the canyon rim, barely distinguishable from the rock itself. But wrong. The proportions were off in a way that took Marcus a moment to identify the arms hung too low, reaching past the hips, past the knees, the fingers almost touching the ground. The shoulders were too narrow for the height. The head was tilted at an angle that no comfortable posture would produce. She'd drawn it again and again, sometimes at the left edge of a landscape, sometimes at the center, sometimes barely visible, a smudge against stone. But always the same figure, always the same wrongness. Ray saw him looking. She closed the sketchbook with a soft sound, pressing it against her chest. "I keep seeing it in my head," she said. Her voice was steady but thin, like thread stretched to its limit. "When I close my eyes, when I look at the rim, I don't know why. It's just there." Marcus wanted to ask her how long. He wanted to ask her if she'd seen it with her eyes open, actually seen it, not imagined it. But something in her face told him she'd already answered that question for herself, and the answer was one she wasn't ready to say out loud. He nodded. He walked away. He didn't look at the canyon rim. Evening came. They cooked dinner over the fire pasta with sauce from a jar, simple and mechanical. They ate without tasting. The conversation came in short, flat exchanges. "Pass the salt, thanks. More water? I'm good."
The kind of talking that exists only to confirm that people are still present, still functioning, still here. After dinner, Marcus caught Owen's eye across the fire. Owen gave the slightest nod, first light. They went to their tents as the last ember glow faded. Zippers closed one by one. The canyon settled into its silence, that vast, deliberate, watchful silence that Marcus had stopped trying to explain and started trying to survive. He lay in his sleeping bag and stared at the ceiling and listened. His plan was simple: stay awake until dawn, then get everyone up and moving. 5 hours, maybe 6. He could do that. He made it to 2 a.m. He knew it was 2 a.m. because he checked his watch when the sound woke him, which meant he'd fallen asleep without realizing it, which meant his body had betrayed him, which meant there had been some window of unconsciousness, some gap in his awareness, and he would never know what had happened in it. The sound that woke him wasn't footsteps, it wasn't a voice, it was a zipper, slow, deliberate. The particular sound of nylon teeth separating under careful, steady pressure. It came from somewhere in camp, not from his tent, not from immediately beside him, but close. 20 feet, maybe less. The sound was unmistakable. Everyone who has ever camped knows it. The ripping whisper of a tent being opened. It lasted about 4 seconds, then silence. A long silence. 10 seconds. 20. Then the zipper again. This time closing. The same careful, steady pressure. The teeth meshing together. The pull tab reaching the end of its track. Then nothing. Marcus lay frozen. His heart was pounding in a way it hadn't since the first night. Not the controlled elevation of alertness, but a wild, animal hammering that he couldn't slow. Something had just opened a tent and closed it again. In the dark. In silence. While they slept. He did not get up. He hated himself for it, but he did not get up. He lay in his sleeping bag and gripped the fabric with both fists and stared at the tent ceiling and waited for the sky to change color. It took 3 hours. They were the longest 3 hours of his life. When the first gray light bled through the nylon, Marcus unzipped his tent and stepped out. The air was cold. The canyon was still. Dew had settled on every surface, turning the tents into dark, glistening shapes. He went to Owen and Ray's tent first. Owen. His voice came out rough, scraped. He cleared his throat. Owen. Rustling, a groan. Owen's face appeared in the unzipped flap, puffy with sleep, confused. What time is it? Early. Are you both okay? Owen looked back into the tent. Yeah, we're fine. What's wrong? Get dressed. We're leaving. Marcus turned to the third tent, Connor and Danny's tent. It sat 10 yards from his own, its rainfly beaded with moisture, its shape undisturbed, zipped shut. Danny, he called. Connor, get up. We're going. No response. He called again, louder. Danny. Nothing. No rustling, no groan, no movement against the fabric. The tent sat perfectly still. Marcus walked to the tent and crouched at the vestibule. The zipper was fully closed, the pull tab resting at the top of the track on the interior side of the flap. He could see it through the mesh window, inside. The zipper had been pulled shut from inside the tent. He reached through the gap between the vestibule and the inner flap, gripped the pull tab through the fabric, and forced it down from the outside, working the teeth open inch by inch. The flap fell open. Connor was there. He was lying on his back in his sleeping bag, arms at his sides, face slack, mouth slightly open. He was asleep, but not the way people are normally asleep. His breathing was too deep, too even, too mechanical. It had the quality of breathing that was being performed rather than experienced. Marcus shook his shoulder. Nothing. He shook harder. Connor's head rolled to the side. Marcus grabbed his face with both hands. "Connor, wake up." Connor's eyes opened. They were glassy, unfocused, aimed at nothing. It took several seconds for them to find Marcus's face, and when they did, there was a terrible lag recognition arriving late, like a signal traveling through damaged wire. "What?" Connor's voice was thick, drugged. "What's happening? Where's Danny?" Connor blinked. He turned his head slowly, looking at the empty space beside him. Danny's sleeping bag was there, unrolled, open. Still holding the impression of her body, still creased where her weight had pressed the insulation flat. Her boots were beside the bag, laces tied, placed neatly side by side. Her jacket was folded over her pack. Her headlamp was clipped to the interior loop near the ceiling, still switched on. Its beam a faint, exhausted amber, barely visible in the gray morning light. Everything was there. Danny was not. Connor sat up. The confusion on his face shifted into something harder, more alert, as the reality of the empty sleeping bag reached whatever part of his brain processed fear. She was right here. She was right here when I fell asleep." "Did you hear anything? Did you hear her get up?" "No, I didn't hear anything. I didn't." He pressed his hands against his face. "I don't even remember falling asleep. I was lying here, and then it's like I was just gone." Owen arrived at the tent opening. He saw the empty sleeping bag and didn't speak. His hand found the tent frame and gripped it, and Marcus watched the color leave his knuckles. "The tent was zipped from inside," Marcus said. He heard his own voice from a distance, as if someone else were speaking. "The pull tab was on the inside." Owen looked at the zipper, looked at the empty bag, looked at Marcus. His mouth opened and closed and opened again. No sound came out. They searched, all four of them, fanning out from the tent in widening arcs, calling Danny's name into a canyon that gave it back to them with that half-second delay, that mocking echo that made it sound like someone else was calling too. It was Ray who found the tracks. 30 feet from the tent, in a patch of soft dirt near the creek bed, bare footprints. Danny's size small, narrow, the ball of the foot pressing deeper than the heel, the way feet press when someone is walking forward with purpose. The prints led away from the tent toward the creek in a straight line, no wavering, no hesitation, no sign that the person making them had paused or looked back or been uncertain about where they were going. The prints continued for about 40 feet, then they stopped. Not at a rock, not at the creek bed where harder ground might lose them. They stopped in the middle of soft, open dirt, mid-stride, the left foot planted and the right foot absent, as if the next step had been taken into the air. As if, between one footfall and the next, Danny Royce had simply ceased to be on the ground. Marcus knelt at the last print. He studied the dirt around it. No drag marks, no scuff patterns, no animal tracks, no second set of footprints, no indication that anyone or anything had been there except Danny, walking barefoot in a straight line at 2 a.m, and then not. He pressed his fingers into the impression of his sister's foot. The dirt was cool and dry. Owen was standing behind him. "Marcus?" Marcus didn't look up. "Marcus, we have to go. Right now." Marcus stared at the footprint, at the empty dirt beyond it, at the impossibility of a person ending mid-step in open ground, no struggle, no sound, no trace.
Connor spoke. His voice was small, stripped of its confidence, its skepticism, its certainty. He sounded like a man who had just watched the floor of his world fall away. "I'll get the packs." No one argued. No one suggested staying to look more. No one said the things people say she might have wandered off. She could be confused. Let's check the ravines. They all knew. They couldn't have said what they knew. They couldn't have named it or described it or pointed to it. But they knew, in the place beneath language, in the part of themselves that was older than speech, that Danny hadn't wandered anywhere. Danny hadn't left the tent on her own terms, and whatever had taken her had not left enough of a trail to follow because it didn't travel the way things with bodies travel. They packed in minutes, leaving behind whatever wasn't essential. The camp stove, the fire grate, half-empty fuel canisters, a bag of food. Hands shaking. Nobody spoke beyond what was necessary. A name, a direction, a question about a strap or a buckle. The kind of communication that happens when speech is a luxury and survival is a task. They left the camp. They didn't look back. The 3 tents stood in the clearing behind them, 2 open, 1 still zipped, all empty now. And the canyon watched them go with its absolute, patient silence. The hike out should have taken 90 minutes. They'd done it once before, in the opposite direction, and Marcus had noted the landmarks, a distinctive pillar of rock where the canyon bent left, a fallen juniper that bridged the creek bed, a section of wall where the strata shifted from red to pale gray. He knew the way. He was certain. But the canyon felt different. It wasn't a dramatic change. It wasn't a wall appearing where a passage should be. It was subtler, a wrongness in scale, as if the distances between landmarks had stretched overnight. The pillar of rock where the canyon bent left was there, but it took 20 minutes to reach instead of 10. The fallen juniper was there, but it was on the wrong side of the creek bed. The section of gray strata was there, but it was ahead of them, not behind them, and Marcus was certain, absolutely certain, that they'd passed it on the way in. He didn't say anything. He kept walking. Owen was behind him, then Ray, then Connor at the rear. They moved in a tight line and Marcus could hear their breathing, fast and shallow, the kind of breathing that happens when the body wants to run, but the mind insists on walking. After 40 minutes, Ray stopped. "Look at the ground." They looked. The dirt beneath their feet was softer here, and in it were footprints, boot prints. Their own Marcus recognized the tread pattern of his hiking boots, the nick in the left heel where he'd caught a rock 2 months ago. These were their prints from the hike in, 2 days ago. But they were facing the wrong direction. They were pointed the same way the group was walking now, toward the trailhead, outbound. But 2 days ago they'd been walking inbound, toward the campsite. The prints should have been pointing the opposite way. Marcus stared at them. He felt something shift in his chest. Not fear exactly, but a deeper dislocation. A feeling of the world's rules bending in a place where they shouldn't bend. "Wind," Connor said from behind them. His voice was hoarse. Wind shifted the dirt, distorted the prints. Owen turned to look at him. "These are in dried mud, Connor. Dried mud doesn't shift." Connor didn't respond. They kept walking. The canyon narrowed. The walls leaned in, the gap of sky above them thinning to a bright slit. Marcus felt the pressure of the rock on either side, felt the space shrinking around them, and he knew that this section of canyon had been wide on the way in, wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast. Now his shoulders were nearly touching the walls. Then the voice, it came from behind them, from the direction of the camp, from the place they'd left.
Marcus, wait. His legs stopped moving before his brain processed the sound. It was involuntary, primal, a response that bypassed every conscious thought and went straight to the part of him that recognized that voice the way he recognized his own heartbeat. Danny's voice, his sister's voice. Clear, natural, unhurried. Not a whisper, not a shout, just Danny, calling to him from somewhere back in the canyon. The way she'd called to him 1,000 times across parking lots, across living rooms, across the distance of a phone call when she was checking in on him during the worst months of the divorce. I'm here. I'm right here. Marcus turned, Owen's hand clamped onto his arm like a vice. Don't. That's Danny. Marcus heard his own voice break. It was the first time since the parking lot in Flagstaff that his composure had cracked, and the sound of it, the raw, splintered edge of it, frightened him almost as much as the voice in the canyon. That is not Danny. Owen's grip tightened. His fingers were digging into Marcus's bicep hard enough to bruise. His face was white, his jaw clenched, and in his eyes Marcus saw something he'd never seen in Owen before. Not just fear, but the absolute, unshakable conviction of someone who has reached a conclusion he cannot retreat from. Listen to me, that is not your sister. Marcus, please. The voice was closer now, not shouting, not desperate, patient, gentle. The tone Danny used when Marcus was being stubborn about something and she was waiting him out. I'm hurt, I fell, I need help. Please don't leave me here. Marcus felt his body leaning backward. Every cell, every nerve, every strand of muscle fiber wanted to turn around and walk toward that voice. She was hurt. She'd fallen. She was calling for him. What kind of brother hears that and walks away? Marcus. Owen's voice was shaking now. He was holding Marcus's arm with both hands. Listen to the words. Listen to the pattern. Marcus listened. Marcus, please. I'm hurt. I fell. I need help. Please don't leave me here. The same sentence, the same cadence, the same breath between fell and I need. The same slight rise on please. Identical, not similar, not close, identical. The exact same sequence of sounds, reproduced without variation, the way a machine reproduces sound perfectly and without understanding. A loop, running in the dark behind them. His sister's voice stripped from her throat and set on repeat by something that knew the right sounds but didn't know why people made them. Marcus's legs buckled. Owen caught him. Ray was beside him, her hand on his back, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. Connor stood frozen, staring back down the canyon, his face the face of a man watching the foundation of his world dissolve. Run, Owen said. They ran. The canyon walls blurred. Their packs slammed against their backs. Their boots pounded the creek bed, the dry stones clattering and rolling beneath their feet. The voice continued behind them, the same sentence, the same loop, patient and unhurried, not chasing, not fading, maintaining the same distance as if it were walking while they ran. Then the canyon opened. It happened suddenly, violently, the walls pulling apart like hands releasing a held breath. The narrow passage gave way to the wide mouth of the canyon, and the dry wash spread out before them, flat, open, flooded with morning sunlight so bright it felt like a physical force. The trucks were there, parked where they'd left them, side by side, untouched, coated in a fine layer of desert dust. The most ordinary sight in the world. Marcus nearly collapsed at the sight of them. Owen reached his truck first. He dug for his keys, hands trembling. dropping them once on the ground before getting the door open. Ray climbed in without a word. Connor went for Marcus's truck, and Marcus followed, and then Marcus stopped. His truck's hood was coated in dust. In the dust, clear as ink on paper, were footprints, bare feet, human. Small and narrow, Danny's size. Danny's shape, the same proportions he'd seen in the soft dirt near the creek bed. They started at the front of the hood. 2 prints side by side, as if someone had stepped up onto the vehicle from the ground. They walked across the hood, left, right, steady, unhurried. They continued onto the roof, across the roof, down the back, onto the tailgate. And then they stopped. The last print was on the edge of the tailgate, toes curled over the lip, the way feet look when someone is standing at the edge of something, about to step off. Marcus walked to the back of the truck. Beyond the tailgate, the ground was undisturbed. Smooth dust, unmarked, unbroken. No prints, no impression, no sign that anything had landed or walked away. The footprints went up, across, to the edge, and then into nothing. Connor was already in the passenger seat. "Marcus, get in the truck. Get in the truck now." Marcus got in the truck. He started the engine. The dashboard clock read 7:14 a.m. The gas gauge read 3/4 full. The rearview mirror showed the canyon mouth behind them, dark and still, framed by red stone walls that looked, in the morning light, like the entrance to a throat. He put the truck in gear and drove. He did not look in the rearview mirror again. They drove for an hour without speaking. The dirt road unspooled behind them, dust rising in the mirrors, the canyon shrinking to a dark notch in the landscape and then disappearing entirely behind a ridge of sandstone. The desert opened up wide, flat, sun-bleached, and Marcus drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes fixed on the road and his mind running in circles. He couldn't stop. Connor sat in the passenger seat with his forehead against the window. He hadn't moved since they'd left the wash. He hadn't spoken. His hands were in his lap, palms up, fingers slightly curled, and Marcus noticed they were shaking a fine, constant tremor, like a current running through wire. In Owen's truck behind them, Marcus could see Owen's silhouette through the dusty rear window, both hands on the wheel, driving close, not letting the gap between them stretch. They passed the trading post. The folding chair by the entrance was empty. The door was closed. No sign of the old woman. Marcus didn't slow down. The dirt road met the 2-lane. The 2-lane met the highway. Cell signal returned 1 bar, then 2, then 3. And the return of connection to the outside world felt less like relief than Marcus expected. It felt like stepping back into a room after seeing something through the window that the room couldn't explain. The room was the same. You were not. The nearest town was a small community off the highway. A gas station, a diner, a post office, a cluster of houses spread along a road that led toward the Navajo Nation. Marcus pulled into the Navajo Nation Police substation, a low building with a flagpole and 2 patrol vehicles parked in front, and Owen pulled in beside him. They went inside. A young officer at the front desk directed them to a room in the back, and an older officer met them there, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with deep lines around his eyes, and a calm, measured way of speaking that reminded Marcus of Danny. The officer's nameplate read B-Gay, Marcus told him. He started with the facts: 5 people, 3-night trip, remote canyon, 1 person missing. Name, age, description, what she was wearing, when she was last seen. The officer wrote everything down in a small notebook, his pen moving steadily, his face neutral. Then Marcus told him where. He described the location, the BLM road, the dry wash, the canyon mouth, the clearing. He gave approximate coordinates from the topographic map. Officer Begay's pen slowed. He looked up. He asked Marcus to describe the location again. Marcus did. The officer set his pen down. He was quiet for a moment, not the awkward silence of someone who didn't know what to say, but the deliberate silence of someone who was choosing very carefully what to say next. "A search team will go in at first light," he said. "I'll need to ask you a few more questions." He asked if they'd touched anything at the campsite. He asked if they'd moved any of Danny's belongings. He asked about the weather, the terrain, whether she'd been feeling ill or disoriented. Then he asked if they'd heard anything unusual.
Marcus hesitated. He glanced at Owen. Owen gave a slight nod. Marcus told him about the voice, Danny's name being called, the repetition, the way it sounded exactly like a person, but wasn't. He watched the officer's face as he spoke, looking for the thing he expected.
Skepticism, dismissal, the professional mask of someone hearing a story they didn't believe. He didn't find it. Officer Begay's expression didn't change, but his hand, which had been resting beside his notebook, stopped moving. It went still in a way that the rest of his body did not. A localized freeze, as if that one hand had heard something the officer's face refused to acknowledge. "I'll note that," Begay said. He picked up his pen and wrote something Marcus couldn't read. "You should stay in town tonight. There's a motel east of the gas station. I'll contact you when the search team has information." He stood. The interview was over. But as they moved toward the door, the officer said one more thing, spoken evenly, without emphasis, as if it were standard procedure. "Don't go back to the canyon." Marcus looked at him. Begay met his eyes. There was nothing in his expression that invited a follow-up question. There was nothing that suggested the statement was negotiable. "We won't," Marcus said. The motel was a single-story building with 12 rooms and a parking lot that could hold maybe 15 cars. It held 2 theirs. The woman at the front desk gave them adjacent rooms without comment and went back to watching a small television behind the counter. They ended up in one room, all 4 of them. No one said why, no one suggested splitting up. Owen sat on the edge of one bed. Ray sat beside him with her knees pulled to her chest. Connor took the chair by the window. Marcus leaned against the wall by the door, arms crossed, staring at the carpet. For a long time, no one spoke. The air conditioner hummed. The television in the next room murmured through the wall. Normal sounds, human sounds. They felt foreign. Owen pulled out his phone. He had Signal now, and Marcus watched him open a browser and type in. He searched the canyon name, the coordinates, anything he could think of. He scrolled, he clicked, he scrolled more. "There's almost nothing," Owen said. "No trail reports, no hiking blogs, no reviews." He was quiet for a moment, reading. "There's one thing, a forum post from 2009, some hunting forum." He read silently, his eyes moving across the screen, and then he read it aloud. "A hunter, solo trip. Same general area." He didn't give exact coordinates, but the description matched. High canyon walls, seasonal creek, juniper and pinyon pine. He'd camped for one night. When he woke up, his campsite had been rearranged. His gear was moved, not scattered, not tossed, but placed. His cook set had been arranged in a line. His boots had been turned to face the opposite direction. His food bag was untouched, unopened, but moved to the exact center of his tent. And his dog, a 6-year-old German shepherd that had never been afraid of anything, had been sitting in the dark when he woke up, rigid, growling at something beyond the firelight. The dog growled for 6 hours, until dawn. Then it stopped and wouldn't eat for 2 days. The hunter never went back. He ended the post with one sentence. Something lives in that canyon, and it isn't wildlife. Owen put the phone down. Ray spoke. She'd been silent since the canyon, not the withdrawn silence of someone processing, but the locked silence of someone holding something in. Now it came out in a low, steady voice directed at her own knees. I need to tell you something. They waited. For the past 2 days since the first night, I've been seeing something at the canyon rim. A figure, standing at the edge. Always at the edge of my vision. Always just far enough away that I couldn't be sure. She paused. Her fingers tightened on her shins. I told myself it was a rock formation, or a tree, or my eyes playing tricks. But it was there every time I looked up. Every time. Same place, same posture, same shape. She was quiet for a moment. Once, I saw it clearly. It was just before sunset, the second day. The light was hitting the rim at a low angle, and the figure was there, and for maybe 3 seconds, it was perfectly lit. It was shaped like a person, the right height, the right proportions almost, but it moved wrong. She pressed her forehead against her knees. It shifted its weight, the way people do when they're standing still, but the movement was studied, practiced, like it had watched a person stand and was performing the action from memory. Like it knew what standing was supposed to look like, but didn't know what standing was supposed to feel like. She lifted her head. Her eyes were dry, but her face was exhausted. The deep, bone-level exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long. I didn't say anything because I thought I was losing my mind. I'm sorry. I should have said something. Owen put his arm around her and pulled her close and pressed his face into her hair and didn't speak. Connor was sitting in the chair by the window. He'd been staring at the curtain, not through the window. At the curtain itself, and his hands were still trembling in his lap. When Ray finished, the room was quiet, and into that quiet, Connor said something in a voice that Marcus barely recognized. Something was in the tent with me. Everyone looked at him. The night Danny disappeared, I told you I didn't hear anything. I told you I didn't remember falling asleep. He swallowed. His throat clicked. That's not true. I remember lying there. I remember feeling heavy, like the air had weight. I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. I tried to move my hands, my legs, my head. Nothing worked. It was like being pinned down by something I couldn't see. He stopped, breathed, continued. And then I felt breath on my face, close, right there. He held his hand 6 inches from his nose. Slow breath, in and out, for a long time. And it smelled wrong, like wet fur, like copper, like something alive that shouldn't be. His hands were shaking violently now. He pressed them flat against his thighs to stop them. I thought I was dreaming. I told myself I was dreaming. I kept telling myself that because the alternative was that something was crouching over me in the dark, breathing on my face, while Danny... He couldn't finish. He turned his head toward the window and pressed his mouth shut, and Marcus watched the muscles in his jaw work, and he understood that Connor Brask, who trusted concrete and rebar, and things you could measure with a tape, had felt something in that tent that no tape measure in the world could account for, and it had broken something inside him that would never fully set. The room was silent. At some point, the sky outside the window turned from blue to gold to dark. They ordered food from the diner and barely touched it. Owen turned the television on, and they watched it without seeing it. The images and sounds washing over them like water over river stones, present, but meaningless. Late, well past midnight, Marcus stepped outside for air. The parking lot was empty except for their trucks. The desert stretched out in every direction under a half moon, silver and vast and silent. The motel's sign buzzed with a faint electrical hum. A moth circled the light above the door. Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets and breathed and tried to feel something other than the hollow, buzzing numbness that had replaced his grief. Then he saw it. At the far edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt gave way to dirt and the dirt gave way to the open desert, a coyote was sitting. It was facing the motel, facing him. It sat upright, perfectly still, the way dogs sit when they're watching something they've been trained to watch. But it was too large. Marcus knew coyotes. He'd photographed hundreds of them. This was bigger. Not wolf big, but wrong big. The proportions slightly off in a way that his photographer's eye caught immediately. The shoulders were too high. The neck was too long. The ears were pointed forward with an intensity that didn't look like animal curiosity. It looked like attention. Focused, deliberate, intelligent attention. It didn't move. It didn't blink. The moonlight caught its eyes, and they reflected back not the green gold of a coyote's tapetum, something duller, something that absorbed the light more than it returned it. Marcus stared at it. It stared at Marcus. He went back inside and locked the door and put the chain on and sat on the floor with his back against the wall. He did not sleep. 3 days passed. The search team went into the canyon. 6 officers, 2 tracking dogs. They found the campsite. They found the tents still standing, untouched, exactly as the group had left them. They found Danny's belongings. They found the footprints leading from the tent to the creek bed. The bare footprints that ended mid-stride in open dirt. They found nothing else. No body, no clothing, no blood, no hair, no fabric caught on branches, no sign of animal attack, no sign of foul play. No sign of anything except a woman who had walked out of a zipped tent in bare feet and 40 feet later stopped existing. The tracking dogs refused to enter the canyon. Both of them. They planted their feet at the wash and would not move. One of them, a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois that had tracked fugitives through swamp and forest and urban rubble, sat down at the canyon mouth and whined. Not barked, whined. The high, thin sound of an animal that understands something its handler doesn't. Danielle Royce was classified as a missing person. Case number assigned. File opened. No leads, no suspects, no evidence. The officer who wrote the report, not Bigay, a younger officer from Window Rock, noted the unusual circumstances, but offered no interpretation. The report was factual, clinical, and completely inadequate. Marcus drove back to Flagstaff alone. Owen and Ray went home to Tempe. Owen called Marcus every other day for the first week, then every few days, then weekly. The calls were short, there was nothing to update, nothing to discuss. The conversations were a ritual of survival. 2 people confirming to each other that they were still here, still functioning, still on the near side of whatever line they crossed in that canyon. Connor went back to Prescott. Owen mentioned in one of his calls that Connor wasn't answering his phone. Hadn't answered since they got back. Owen had driven to his apartment once. The lights were on. The truck was in the lot.
Connor didn't answer the door. Marcus sat in his apartment in Flagstaff and looked at the walls and ate when he remembered to eat and slept in increments of 20 or 30 minutes, before waking with the feeling that someone was standing in the room. Danny's emergency contact card was still pinned to his fridge. Her handwriting neat, angular, the capital D in Danny like a small door. Her phone number, which he'd called 41 times in the 3 days after the canyon, hearing it ring and ring and ring in whatever dark place her phone was lying. Until the voicemail picked up and her voice, her real voice, her actual voice said, "It's Danny, leave one." And he'd hung up every time because the sound of her voice made him feel like the ground was dissolving under his feet. He stopped calling on the 4th day, not because he'd accepted it, because he'd realized that every time he called, he was listening to her voicemail greeting and wondering if it was really her, or if it was something else wearing her voice like a coat, and the fact that he couldn't tell the difference anymore frightened him more than the silence. 2 weeks after the canyon, Marcus picked up his camera for the first time. He'd left it in his gear bag, untouched, the same bag he'd carried out of the canyon at a run. He turned it on. The battery was at 11%. He scrolled through the photos: canyon walls, juniper bark, the creek bed. The petroglyphs, the spirals, the sheep, the many-jointed figure. The campfire on the first night. Owen laughing, his head thrown back, the firelight turning his skin amber. Ray sketching, her face half-lit, focused. Danny, sitting across the fire, caught mid-sentence, her hands moving the way they always moved when she talked. Her face alive with something she was saying that Marcus couldn't remember now and would never hear again. He almost stopped there. He almost turned the camera off and put it back in the bag and never looked at it again. But there was one more photo. It was dated 2 days after the campfire shots. Time-stamped 2:47 a.m., the second night. The night the voice had called Danny's name. The night Marcus had slept through for the first time. He didn't remember taking a photo at 2:47 a.m. He hadn't been awake at 2:47 a.m. He opened the file. The image was dark, nearly black. The kind of underexposed frame that happens when a camera fires in total darkness without flash. He could make out nothing, just black. He transferred the file to his laptop, opened it in editing software, pulled the exposure slider to the right, pulled the shadows slider up, adjusted the highlights. The image emerged from the dark like something surfacing from deep water. It was the interior of his tent, his sleeping bag, his gear, arranged the way he'd arranged it. And in the center of the frame, lying in the sleeping bag, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, perfectly asleep Marcus. The photo had been taken from inside the tent, from a position directly above him, maybe 3 feet from his face. Whatever had taken it was holding his camera. His camera, which had been in his gear bag at the foot of his sleeping bag, zipped shut. Something had been inside his tent while he slept. It had opened his bag, removed his camera, held it above his face, and taken a photograph of him sleeping. And then it had returned the camera to the bag, zipped the bag shut, and left. Or stayed. He didn't know which was worse. Marcus closed the laptop. The screen went dark. His reflection stared back at him from the black glass, hollow-eyed, unshaven. A face that looked like it had aged 10 years and 3 weeks. He sat in the dark for a long time. Weeks passed. Marcus didn't go back to work. His landlord called about the lease renewal. He let it go to voicemail. Owen's calls came like clockwork Wednesday evenings, 7 o'clock.
They talked about nothing, the weather, a movie Owen had seen, a student who'd said something funny. They didn't talk about the canyon. They didn't talk about Danny. They didn't talk about the photo, because Marcus hadn't told anyone about the photo. He didn't know how. He didn't know what words would make another person understand what it felt like to see yourself sleeping in a photograph taken by something that shouldn't exist. The police had no updates. The case was open. The file sat in a cabinet in window rock, growing no thicker. One night, a Tuesday, unremarkable, the kind of night that blends into the nights before and after it, Marcus woke at 2 a.m. Not gradually, not gently. The same clean, instantaneous transition from a sleep to a wake that had happened in the canyon, as if something had reached inside him and flipped the switch. His apartment was silent. The city hummed outside distant traffic. A far-off siren, the low electrical drone of the streetlight outside his window. Normal sounds, living sounds. And then, from somewhere close, not outside, not from the hallway, not from the apartment above or below, from inside the walls of his own apartment, from the space between the drywall and the studs, from a place that shouldn't contain a voice, he heard it. Marcus. Just his name. Once. And Danny's voice. Her exact voice. Not a recording. Not a memory. Her voice, present and immediate, as if she were standing inside the wall. Her mouth inches from the plaster, speaking his name into the hollow dark between the beams. The apartment settled. The refrigerator hummed. The streetlight buzzed. Marcus lay in the dark and did not move. He did not call out. He did not answer. He already knew. Whatever had heard his sister say his name, whatever had crouched in the dark of a canyon in northeastern Arizona and listened to a woman speak and learn the shape of her voice, the way a predator learns the shape of its prey, was still saying it. It had followed him out. It was here, in the walls and the silence between sounds, in the spaces that should be empty, but weren't. Patient, unhurried, the way it had been patient in the canyon, the way the canyon itself had been patient sitting in the desert for centuries, shaped like a palm, waiting for someone to step inside. And it would keep saying her name, his name, the names of people it had touched and tasted and taken. It would keep saying them in the dark, in the quiet hours, in the spaces between waking and sleep, until someone answered. Marcus stared at the ceiling and listened to his own breathing and felt the apartment around him. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. The dark and understood, with a clarity that was worse than fear, that he would spend the rest of his life not answering. And he would never be sure that was enough. Now, I want you to sit with that for a second. Because stories like this, the ones that settle into the back of your mind and stay there when you turn the lights off, they don't come along every day. And if this one got under your skin, if you're still thinking about that tent zipped from the inside, about those footprints that ended in open dirt, about that photo taken at 2:47 a.m., then you already know this channel is where you belong. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. Leave a comment, tell me, what would you have done if you heard someone call your name from outside that tent? Would you have opened the zipper? And if this story kept you watching until the end, a like goes a long way. It helps more people find these stories, and some stories deserve to be found. I'll see you in the next one.